Welcome to the first edition of the Tank at Towson. I'm Dr. Jane Neapolitan from the Office of Academic Innovation, and we're so glad that you could join us today. The Office of Academic Innovation at Towson University provides supports for faculty as leaders in teaching, scholarship, and service. We are proud of the fact that OAI is the first established Office of Academic Innovation within the University System of Maryland. OAI is part of a national trend toward academic transformation in higher education. Our programs and services bring together the best of educational and technical ideas for learning through faculty professional development, instructional design services, collaboration and partnerships, and distance education quality assurance. I hope you'll find the Tank at Towson to be engaging as well as informative. So thank you again for joining us. And now I'll hand it over to Joe Brightman down in the studio.
Hi, my name's Joe Brightman, and today I'll be your facilitator for the Tank at Towson. The first thing that I'd like to establish really are just some basic rules for interaction or the expectations that we have for participation today. This series, the Tank at Towson, is really a hybrid think tank. So it's part think tank, part roundtable discussion, and part as well webinar, since we're doing it online. And so our goals are really to share successes and to spread the word about those successes, to disseminate or to facilitate the dissemination of sound instructional practices across campus. As well, we're here to bring forward new ideas and to explore in a somewhat imaginative way what we're doing. Now, in a typical think tank, one thing that is different about ours, in a typical think tank, you present a problem, and the goal is to solve a problem. Now, the great thing about the Tank at Towson is that we're not going to present you a problem. What we'd like to present you today is a solution. And so that's really the context of our conversation. We're looking to take that solution and see how much further we can take it. See if there are ways that you can relate it to your own practices and ways that you may be able to bring these benefits to your students. And so each session will bring you a solution rather than a problem. We hope that you bring your ideas to the table. We'd like you to participate verbally or in the chat box if you need to. As well, we'd like you to think outside of that box. Now, we also would like this to be a safe space. The tank should always be considered a safe space for sharing your ideas and for conversation. And just a few guidelines that I had read that were published by Frost and Sullivan for think tank safe space establishment include not necessarily using names to refer to people's ideas in the group, but rather to refer to the name, or the example, I should say. For example, you might say, someone had an idea relating to an economics course, and they could go and add to that by doing X, Y, and Z. As well, we hope that everybody remains open-minded and avoids saying things like, that's fine all in theory, but statements are a little bit dismissive, and we really hope to bring those ideas forward. To lead into today's talk, I have a transitional quote from Salman Khan's 2011 TED Talk for you. As he began to implement the Khan Academy, he started to notice some changes, specifically by sending his videos to his cousins. Most of the Khan Academy work came with work from his cousins. And so his quote is, "As soon as I put those first few YouTube videos up, something interesting happened." Actually, a few things that were interesting. The first was the feedback from my cousins. They told me that they preferred the me on YouTube than the me in person. So, once you get over the backhanded nature of that, there actually was something profound there. They were sharing or saying that they were saying that they preferred the automated version of their cousin to their actual cousin. At first, it seemed very unintuitive, but when you actually think about it from their point of view, it makes a ton of sense. You have this situation where now they can pause and repeat their cousin without feeling like they're wasting his time. If they have to review something that they should have learned a couple of weeks ago or maybe a couple of years ago, they don't have to be embarrassed and ask their cousin. And they can just watch those videos. So at this point, I'd like to introduce Dr. Erik Scully, who is a professor in our biological sciences department and who has also been working with Panopto for some time now as a lecture capture tool within his classes. So at this point, I'd like to turn it over to Dr. Scully. Thank you.
All right. Well, thanks for having me, especially for this inaugural event. I'm rarely the first to do anything. But as you can see from the slide up there, I'm willing to try just about anything in terms of like alternative ways of delivering classroom material. So not to shamelessly self-promote myself, but over the years I've been involved when the university first expanded up to Harford County, and of course now we've got the Towson building, and I'll get back to that. So one year I taught my marine biology class where I actually went up to the heat center, and we had a video conference link down here. So I actually had half a dozen students up in Harford County with the bulk of the class down there, down here. And that was nice experience. A few years back, some of you may remember the university tried a system very similar to Panopto in terms of lecture capture called Tegrity. And for a variety of reasons that, it wasn't adopted. I wasn't involved in the decision. I just like, trying these things out. However, after that, I began to routinely offer my marine biology class in a dual section format. One group signs up for what I refer to as a live and in-person section, and this current semester, for example, I have about 32 students in that section. And then I have another group that is exclusively online, and this semester that's about 20 students. In the past, I had used the media site classroom, which was, in case, at least in my experience, used up in Cook 404B. And that was nice, but obviously it's a limited facility. And while there are media site classrooms over in the College of Liberal Arts, they're often difficult to schedule, etc. And they require certain technical support. The good news is the university's adopted Panopto, and I was involved in the second phase of the trial program last spring, and I used it for my Biology 2A biodiversity class, and I may have a little bit more to say about that. But right now, as I've already mentioned, I'm using Panopto for my marine biology class, and again, I've got this split dual section format. Officially, the online class is hybrid because the students come in and take their exams live and in person. But the rest of it, every lecture is recorded. It's presented to the live and in-person group. And then the great thing about Panopto is usually within minutes of ending the lecture is available online. And so I actually have some students that have emailed me with questions as soon as half an hour after the lecture was originally presented, and they're in the online group. So if I could have the next slide. I'm not sure about the logistics of switching. Okay. So the obvious question is then, why use Panopto? And the simple answer right now is it's available everywhere. I have it on my desktop PC. I've used it at home. It's obviously in the classrooms. I've installed it just about anywhere where I or another biology faculty member might want to use it. And then the other thing, for those of you who are unfamiliar with it or haven't had the opportunity to use it yet, is it is fully integrated with Blackboard. It's set up in such a way that, again, as soon as my lectures are over and they're uploaded to the Panopto servers, I get a message usually in about a few minutes that allows me to put the direct link within Blackboard. So all the lectures are there. They don't have to go out to a separate server or search through YouTube or anything along those lines. Now, the obvious question is, why am I using this? And primarily, I've been using things like this in the media site classroom, in particular for my marine biology class, for a variety of reasons. One is that, as I'm sure everybody here is well aware, the note-taking skills of our students are variable, to say the least, and so in those portions of the course where you're lecturing, you want to get the students to get the highlights and so on. Unfortunately, a very common phenomenon is people will only write down what you put on the board, whether it's a chalkboard or whiteboard or a smart board. That doesn't really matter. Well, one of the advantages of using lecture capture is they can get everything. If they've missed something, or in some cases if they've missed a class, and I'll get back to that, they've got the opportunity to take down additional material, go back over something that they may have misheard or just possibly missed entirely during the original lecture, and so that's certainly one nice feature. Even if you're in a situation where you make your lecture notes available ahead of time in PowerPoint slides, etc., as I know some instructors do, that still doesn't guarantee that the students are getting everything you want to. Now, another fairly common situation in the university, and I think it's an important one to keep in mind, is if you have a student that needs accommodations via disability support services. Everybody's had the experience of getting the memo. In some cases, they go on for multiple pages, setting out some of the various things the students need to compensate for their particular learning issues. Well, one of the most common ones is giving the students the access to all of your PowerPoint slides ahead of time, which many people do for all their students, and the class note taker. And while those in principle do fulfill that accommodation, again, it's not the same thing as giving the opportunity of those students who need it the chance to go through the lecture again. And I have one anecdotal case that I always mention. A couple years ago when I was doing marine biology via media site, one of the students who had signed up for the online class had one of these extensive disability support memos, including the slides and the note taker and so on and so forth. Well, he ended up being the highest grade in the class. And he told me at the end of the semester that his experience using, at that time, media site, being able to watch the lectures over and over until he got it, was far superior to getting somebody's notes, regardless of how detailed they were. Of course, as was mentioned earlier, part of this office's goal is to expand the university's online education offerings. And of course, Panopto means that in principle, just about every course is going to be a situation where it could be turned into a distance education course if the instructors feel it's appropriate, in terms of what they're doing. And so this semester, one of the 50 students I have in marine biology takes all of his other regular in-class courses up at Tune, and through the Office of Student Services up there, I simply arrange it for him to take his exams up there. They scan them, they send them down to me. And right now, he seems to be happy with the experience. The last thing I put up on the slide is, this is another tool the university's made available. They give us classroom space, they give us chalkboard, whiteboard, everything else. Even if you don't want to use lecture capture for everything, it's still got the the possibility of using it for a wide variety of other things. Now, I need to switch to the next slide, I think. Yeah, sorry about that. Yeah, so on the faculty side, there's a lot of reasons aside from traditional lecture capture that you might want to use something like this. I'm not proposing that everybody just record all their lectures. Again, it's a tool, and whatever works for any given situation is going to be obviously the thing that instructors will go for. So one thing is, if you're recording everything, the students got it. If someone, hopefully this doesn't happen too often, but if a student says, "I never heard you say that," well, you got the recording from last Tuesday, where in fact you did recover it. The other thing is, a hot topic these days is the idea of flipping classes, and the concept there is you put the content outside the regular class time and use the class time for more student discussion and various other versions of student engagement. And clearly, if you've got a class where that's the way you want to go, then granted it takes some time outside of class to record all the content material, but in reality, that's really no different than preparing that content material presented in class and losing the class discussion time. So there's that possibility. One of the things that I've actually used a couple of different software packages for, and now I'm just using Panopto, is I routinely record mini lectures for all my classes. And these can be anywhere from 10 to, you probably already gathered the way I talk, 20 minutes or more, of material that might be a special case study. It might be something I want to present outside of regular class time rather than plugging it into standard lecture time, etc. In some instances, I've used the mini lecture concept to go over an exam rather than do it in class. So I hand back the exam and just say, well, now you can watch the overview for the exam. One of the other things, and I'm sure this applies to just about everyone, you're in the middle of the semester and something's been published or discussed or something somewhere that is really germane to the course. Possibly you've already covered the topic, etc. And so you don't want to necessarily back up and take up class time. Well, this is another opportunity to record using Panopto. It's already happened a couple of times in my marine biology class. Paper comes out about 2 weeks after we've covered the topic, and so I've just taken the paper and turned it into a short 5 to 10 minute lecture, post online, and now it's part of the additional course content. So you can keep things really as current as possible. One last thing I put on the slide is, when our students get sick, they obviously miss class, and you generally advise them, well, get the class notes, or come meet me and we can talk over assignments, etc. Well, if I were to get sick during marine biology, now it affects 50 people. And fortunately, it hasn't happened to me, but we do have a situation right now in my department where one of our instructors has actually been recommended to stay outside the classroom, basically stay home and rest. Well, leaving aside some obvious human resources questions, the bottom line is, well, what do you do in those types of situations? Well, again, obviously this is not going to work for every possible situation, but fortunately in this particular case it does. She's actually home recording her lectures, and we've got a teaching assistant, and we've got some collegially supported backup, so that if students have questions, there's still somebody they can see, etc. So there's another use of all these various possibilities. The last things I put on there are some of the technical issues aside from Panopto itself. Depending on how you're going to use it, you'll want a good microphone. And so in class, I'm not getting any kickbacks from the company, but in class, I use a Rebel Labs XTAG wireless microphone and found it really good and dependable, and it records clearly. And while they're not inexpensive, I believe they would be covered at least in part by student technology fees, etc. If you're going to use it outside of class, obviously just about any good microphone would work. And then one other issue that people might consider if they're now thinking about Panopto after I've done the sales pitch is that whether or not you want to do a second video capture. I just capture the slides and my voice, etc. However, some people might like it if the recording included a view of them. And I decided that I just, my students didn't necessarily need to see me. They can see me in my office. And I know this is a very common experience. People often are uncomfortable hearing their voice recorded. Well, I'll add video, and now you really get uncomfortable. So I have to admit, I turned off the webcam option simply because I didn't want to watch myself present the lectures. So those are some of the background things. Now, there are some issues with using any kind of lecture, capture material, etc. The obvious question is, how do the students utilize it, and are they utilizing it effectively? I mean, you make the same argument with note-taking and so on and so forth. last spring, when I used Panopto to capture my Biology 208 lectures, one of the nice things about Panopto, and of course there's also features in Blackboard to allow you to do this, is you can actually look at viewing statistics. And no big surprise, human nature being what it is, you've got a situation where just before an exam you see this incredible, or at least for Bio 208, this big surge in viewing. Now, I didn't have an online section in that case. It was the students knowing the lecture was recorded and they could go back and use it to review and so on. So possibly the cramming phenomenon was related to that. I've noticed with the marine biology course, where I've got this cohort of students online, they're treating it like every other course. They're watching it on their own schedule, but they're watching it on a consistent basis. And so, you know, there's certainly that. Now, one criticism I'm sure that some people are going to raise, and it's a pretty legitimate one, is does this make the students even more passive? You know, one of the things we're really concerned about is student engagement. You know, we want the students actively learning. Well, again, not to say it is an important issue, but regardless of how you're communicating information and facilitating your students' learning, student engagement is always going to be an issue. So you know, now you're making sure to get the content, even if it's a recording of a class discussion, so you can go back and look at the points discussed, and you can use the fact that that recording now exists to follow up on that and build on it and with student engagement. So those are you know some issues. I'm sure some people are going to ask if I have good quantitative assessment, and the answer is quite simply no. I was hoping last spring that the use of Panopto in Biology 208, the biodiversity class, would improve student performance. There wasn't a dramatic difference in performance between that particular semester and past semesters when I taught it. However, part of that may have been due to the fact that I have to admit I made the exams a little more challenging because I knew the students had the details. They had heard it in class, they had the chance to review those details, and I could actually expect more on examinations. And so I may, you know, that may be in part why I didn't see a change in performance. I'd actually upped the ante a bit in terms of what they were expected. So those are some of the background questions. So
yeah, it sounds pretty amazing, and it sounds like we may have jumped into a treasure trove of those solutions we're looking for today. That's excellent. One of the questions I did want to ask is, even though critics may say that watching a video would decrease engagement, do you feel more like possibly that having the chance to actually rewind and look over those parts and then actually physically engage with the lecture multiple times in their own setting, do you feel like that would maybe even increase their engagement?
Again, I'd love to give you a quantitative comparison, but I'm not really an assessment person. One thing I've certainly noticed since I've been doing the online section of marine biology is in many instances I get more questions from the online students. You know, usually within a couple of days of lecture, people have viewed it once and they want clarification for it. And some of that might be that, you know, technically, well, they're all on campus really. You know, they may not feel subconsciously like they can come and see me in person. But you know, certainly the people that their primary interaction in the course is watching these recorded lectures, they actually seem to be giving me more and in terms of feedback. The one thing, and I'd be glad to hear from anybody out there who has ideas about this, one of the big challenges is engaging the online students in class discussion. I know there are a variety of tools in Blackboard and so on, but while I can tease out when an individual student is watching lectures and so on, if there's something I want to follow up discussion there, it's a little bit harder to organize and schedule. And so that is one of the challenges. But I'm trying a couple of various techniques, and maybe if I have something I really think is worth sharing, I'll come back at some point and talk about those.
Yeah, that sounds great. So digging a little bit deeper and bringing this more into a little bit more of our academics and to more of the teacher level, teacher talk, so to speak. What would you say the greatest benefit? I've heard many benefits that you personally have reaped from using Panopto. What would you say the number one greatest benefit to you has been?
Gosh, benefit to me, I feel I can always keep the class fresh. One of the reasons why I'm now using Panopto, and I didn't go through my entire history, things like Camtasia and stuff, is most of the courses I teach, even the lower level courses, there's always current developments. And if you're doing the standard classroom presentation, it's almost basically impossible to back up without losing too much class time to bring in those current developments. Now I've just routinely gotten to the point where I do these mini lectures. Again, if a paper comes out, there's a time to read the paper, and there's another maybe 15, 20 minutes, half an hour at most of setting up the mini lecture and recording it and posting it and saying, well, remember when 2 weeks ago we talked about mosaic patterns in intertidal communities? Just to give you a quick example from marine biology. Well, this paper just came out, and they're using this individual-based model, and here's the results, and watch the mini lecture online. And the obvious question is, could this potentially be on the next exam or the final? And the answer is yes, because now you've got additional content. So the benefit to me is really keeping things current. Also being able to go back and clarify things. I run the typical review sessions, sometimes in class, outside of class. Again, human nature being what it is, just before exams get questions. I used to write more or less concise answers to those questions and post them on Blackboard. Well, now, depending on the nature of the question, I can give a detailed answer, including illustrations, and have it recorded within, again, a fairly brief time.
Yeah, and so this sounds too, since you're saying you can give feedback through multiple media, this ties into the university's UDL initiative. And so one of the other models that I had noticed that it sounds like it's coming through is a blended or a somewhat flipped type of setting. Could you expand on any of the theories or models you're following?
Well, again, as I view it anyway, it goes back to student engagement. There's plenty of data out there, and I realize I'm one of the practitioners of it, that the standard lecture format is one of the less effective ways of teaching and engaging students. Well, if you can move the material that is appropriate for lecture format outside of the classroom, then that means that you've got more time for class discussion, for short group type of exercises that are then come back and shared with the class. At one point in time, we used to just tell students, read the textbook, and then we're going to talk about it in class. Well, now, we've got complete control over the content, and then how that's utilized in class to encourage student engagement is obviously up to us.
Yeah, that seems to be one of the typical, not necessarily challenges, but typical building, one of the steps you go through in developing any online or blended course. Another thought that crossed my mind is that you told us about one student's reaction where you saw a very, very specific improvement by a note taker. Can you tell me about possibly any other student reactions that you've had to this?
Actually, the general student reaction, again, marine biology is where I've got the longest experience, is regardless of which section they sign up for, online or in person. Generally, I've gotten the response that they like to be able to go through the lecture again instead of just reviewing their notes. I have students that when they sign up for marine biology, they tell me that they're hesitant to do the online class, in part because maybe they have a little inferiority about time management, but they feel like they'll get a better experience by actually hearing me present it live and in person. Well, some of those same students tell me that it then makes a big difference to see it, I'm going to say, performed once, and then be able to watch the performance over again. And in terms of the information, I should also mention that one of the reasons why I've used it so much for marine biology, it's a content-heavy course. It's a broad and at the same time fairly detailed survey of all sorts of marine communities. There's an awful lot of information. There's an awful lot of terminology. Even though I generally have been able to find a good textbook, there's an awful lot of content that's presented in that case.
Yeah, I think in a lot of cases the online environment or the blended or possibly even in a face-to-face course, just incorporating some of those technological techniques can provide at least a foundation or a basis to organize massive amounts of information like that. That's amazing. Do you have any other general dig deep type of comments that you'd like to add, or any real great significant reactions?
Well, I had a student a few years ago. This goes back to, I mentioned, what happens if a faculty member gets sick. Obviously, students get sick. I had a student a couple of years ago, marine biology, who was pregnant, and her due date was going to be during finals week. Well, the baby arrived early, and while the student did end up having to take incomplete, just sort of, transitioning into being a new mom and everything else. She still got through the lecture material and the assignments with a 3 or 4 day hiatus, because what had happened was that she had effectively been moved to the online class. And I've also had students, and of course this is a major issue in the university. We've got a lot of students at work, and that gives them a whole different scheduling issue. And one of the reasons why some of my students sign up for the online classes is they know, well, here's the one class that they can move to sort of any time status, and they don't have to try to work around various schedules, etc. And while I typically offer my class out of prime time, because I know how popular certain time blocks are, I do have students I know this semester that are taking marine biology as one biology elective, and they can take a second biology elective that's offered at the same time as a live and in-person lecture class, because now they don't have a time conflict. And so they're getting 2 courses, they're just shifting one to a different time period.
And so it sounds like we not only are really solving problems at the faculty level, but this directly feeds through, and the benefits go to the students, but then as well when it comes to retention and it comes to other issues, scheduling, being able to take courses that are convenient for today's student, it sounds like we're even pushing up into those higher levels of solutions, which is just amazing.
I hope so.
You're doing a great job with it. And so at this point, we do have some more questions that we can work with, that we can continue the interview format with. But we'd really like to open up to some questions and comments from the field, and that's from the attendees. So if you are interested in participating in today's discussion, we really would like to hear your ideas. We really would like to see if there's any way you could suggest that you could apply something similar to lecture capture to your own situation, in the hopes that maybe someone else can take that and put that into their classroom situation and start that real think tank generation moving forward. In order to participate, all you'll need to do, I believe everyone has requested audio, as is on the slide in the PowerPoint right now. And so if you're interested, it would be great if you could post a question in the chat box, and then if you're willing to speak, we can call on you that way. Or you'll also see a small hand icon. That's the icon to raise your hand to let us know that you're waiting to speak. So at this point, from the audience, do we have any questions or suggestions, comments, ideas, solutions that we can move with? And this may take a second. We do expect that may take a second for you to move forward. And so we do have another question that we can ask Dr. Scully as we go. Do you have any suggestions for faculty on small steps that they can take to get started moving forward in this?
Well, in the context of Panopto, even if you don't feel that it's appropriate for lecture capture, so recording your entire class, one thing you should certainly consider is this mini lecture concept, or possibly the discussion of a concept that you want to then use as a lead-in to class discussion. You'd be able to present the concept in a little more detail, and you just record it, put it up on Blackboard, tell your students that they've got to listen, view, however you want to phrase it. I mean, you can technically do just audio capture, and then you're going to pick it up in class. And so, the software is there. It's so easy that I feel if I can use it, anybody can use it. And so, one thing you can do is simply experiment with the possibilities. You can easily find the link for downloading and installing on your computer on the Software Center, if that's behaving itself on your particular computer. But I'd be more than happy to help people. I think one of the things we're going to see if the university continues the commitment to Panopto is we're going to have an expanded users group, people that are actually used to using it in the classroom, and any quick fixes or technical issues or tips and tricks that might come up.
Yeah. So that's it. That I do believe also, very similar to you, that the best way to get into any tool is just use it. Yeah. We're luckily at a point where most mistakes won't crash your computer or end up doing permanent damage, so you'll always have that chance to go back. And so looking at the screen, I see that we have a comment that says I would guess that for video and audio capture, or I would guess that video and audio capture files are quite large. If there are several for a semester, what storage issues do you foresee? And I can field that one if you'd like.
Oh, go right ahead, but then I can tell you my own experience.
All right, thanks. This one, too, to keep in mind, Blackboard, at this time, I had heard from one of our Blackboard administrators that they currently are not imposing storage limits on us in Blackboard. So at this point, we should be able to upload as much as we would need to our Blackboard sites, and Panopto actually links directly through to Blackboard and is stored within Blackboard. So at this point, I don't foresee a lot of storage issues. Did you have more to add to that?
Yes, just to give you a quick, first-hand experience. Last semester when I did biodiversity, or my biology 208 class, I failed to mention I had two sections. I recorded the lectures, even though they're covering the same material. For both sections, I had a combined Blackboard site for the two sections. Everything uploaded there without any problem, and so I was giving, in one sense, duplicate lectures every week. But let's see, I had 300 minutes of lecture a week that resided on the laptop in the classroom and Blackboard, and I never ran into any kind of storage issues. I suspect the Panopto people have their own little software tweaks to keep the file sizes as small as practical. One thing I actually forgot to mention in terms of students utilizing the recorded lectures, Panopto has apps for both Android and iOS systems. And one of the things that surprised me last spring was I had students listening to the lectures on their smartphones. I literally had somebody come into the office one day with a question, and it wasn't clear at first what she was asking, and she pulled out her phone and hit the app and played 5 minutes worth of lecture and wanted more clarification. That, by the way, also led to a mini lecture because I realized I hadn't put that concept across. I should have probably put it on the slide. It's a nice way to check yourself. If you're not, if it looks like something is not going well, maybe on the subsequent exam, I have to admit I've gone back a couple of times to see how I actually presented it to find out where the misunderstanding was occurring.
Yeah, and that's great that you can clear those things up and have a documented version of the exact first thing that you said, so that you don't have to have that confusion anymore. It's even said one of our participants also would like to know if they contacted you, would you be willing to share a few of your recordings with other faculty members?
Oh, sure. Or I'm sure I can work with your office to, for example, just take a typical marine biology lecture and move it over so people can view it. Right now they're all within the Blackboard site. for the course.
That's great.
But I mean, if you want to be added as an observer or whatever, we can certainly do that.
That sounds great. Just get in contact with one of us and we'll make that happen to you. And I think for our final question today, before we begin to wrap up, we have the question, to what extent does Dr. S use the data analytics in Blackboard? Do you find them useful or not for modifying your course?
I have to admit, I don't use them heavily. One of the main things I've been doing is I want to get a better idea of when and how students are actually using this. So with Panopto itself, you can get overall viewing statistics, and that's where I saw that surge last spring, just before exams in Bio 2.8. This semester, I'm using the feature that, of course, is in Blackboard, where you can track individual students. And I didn't want to start getting into this issue because I was more interested in the other aspects of the software. But I did have a couple of students that did not do well on the first exam, and I was able to go back and look at them individually and point out to them that they tried to cram 2 weeks worth of lecture into 3 days before the exam, and that clearly is not going to work.
Yeah, the analytics are always very helpful in identifying exactly how students interact and what they have interacted with and how they're doing so that you can aid or possibly correct where needed. And so to bring today's session to a wrap, I'll begin to kind of summarize some of the ideas that we went through today. Dr. Scully brought through that, yes, there are many benefits for faculty. Not only do you have a repository to keep your materials consistent, but you can use Panopto to keep them up to date, since you only have small parts to update from semester to semester. Another one is also another part. There are many benefits that are clear to the students, and so it's more of a trickle down effect. I feel that once we create benefits for the once we can see those benefits within the faculty, in making our jobs easier, makes the students' jobs easier as they provide greater access to information, as we're providing also information in a way they can consume somewhat better. And it looks like we do have one more topic that we'd like to take to the audience, from the audience, before we're wrapping up. And so, Dr. Scully, have you had any students actually upload video to your Blackboard courses from Panopto using the smartphone app?
No, I haven't had anybody upload. In this particular context, it's all me. However, I know that it had, since the software is generally available, and obviously there's other people on campus that probably speak better to this. You could have students record their own presentations for class discussion, and those could, in principle, be uploaded. I mean, the Panopto video link, I believe, is available to anybody.
Yeah.
And so
jumping back to that engagement piece,
right.
This is a way to promote active learning,
right.
which is also highly encouraged in any online or blended setting, and it gives your students a chance to interact not only with technology, which is somewhat standard now, but also to interact with the content and produce their own content. So to wrap today up, we'd like to ask to the audience, or we'd like to give you a few pointers first, or a few little notes first. We will be posting links on the TANK website to our recordings of the session, which is www.towson.edu/thetank. And so this will be archived for future reference. And as we build a library of these, we'll also bring all these to that site. So please visit there for updates as we plan our upcoming sessions. You'll also be able to see what's coming, what our future topics are, and anything else. And it does look like one of our participants would like to see a second lecture see a lecture from you. Also, as far as moving forward goes, this is really our first session, and it's a small session. So in future sessions, we'd love if you could help us as our user base right now by possibly letting people know that this opportunity exists, and it's really a chance, even though we did most of the talking today, it's really a chance for you to talk as well, and to bring those ideas and link your coursework to the coursework you see presented by our faculty right here in our very own university. So to wrap up today, I'd like to say thank you. Please spread the word, and for future updates, please visit our website at www.towson.edu/thetank. Thank you very much.